Welcome back. You are listening to the Cream City Club podcast. This is episode number 48. I'm Spencer Michaelis, and I'm here as always with Gunnar Amalunk. Gunnar, how you doing this Monday evening?
Not too bad. I signed off on a new apartment. I won't tell people where it is because I don't want any crazy fan chasing me down because of my horrible take that I'm about to make in this podcast or any future podcast. But I'll tell you off air, Spencer, once we're done. But how's your life going?
That's great. Then I can share the coordinates with Twitter, and then everyone will
Yeah,
know. Uh,
at least it's not
no,
my fault.
I'm doing fine. Again, I'm just enjoying actually being able to relax a little bit more often than I did for the past 3 months when we were in the midst of our college season. So having a little bit of time after work is not the worst thing, I will say, though I do obviously enjoy the coaching thing as well. But yeah, before we get into this, if you are listening and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are listening on. Rate us 5 stars if you believe we deserve that. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. And today is going to be a Brewers focused episode. We've got coming off the heels of a little road trip that the Brewers made. So, Gunnar, what are we going to get into today?
Yeah, we'll touch on that first a little bit with that Phillies series. Somewhat fun in some aspects. It was fun to get off and play some good competition, but of course we ended up on the short side of the stick all three of those games. And we'll touch on maybe more specifically the offense as it pertains to that series. And then of course we'll talk about this Tigers series that just happened over the weekend. And then continuing our questions for the crew, we'll touch on injury updates, specifically to Gasser and DJ Hall or DL Hall, excuse me. And then our trade rumors that we've got here early in June already, which we're excited to talk about. A couple big names. Carlos Rodriguez is arriving here on Tuesday, tomorrow, as we record here on Monday, which we're excited about. And then our way too early All-Star game picks for the Brewers, who we think that should make it for us. But yeah, starting off with that Phillies series, as I talked about earlier, given that we've lost those three games, 3-1, 2-1 in 10 innings, 2-0. In terms of offense, Spencer, was this Phillies series concerning for you, maybe long term? As I mentioned too, this is a really good Phillies team, so it's a team that you're probably going to have to beat in the future to get to where you want to get to. But so maybe thinking about it maybe in postseason terms, not even specifically that team, but you're gonna have to be playing the higher good teams in the long run. Are you concerned about our offense when we face those types of teams?
No, I'm not. I think, how should I put this? I think a lot of fans get caught up in the day to day, like, okay, we played a good team. I get it. It's hard not to, but you get wrapped up in you played a good team. They had not even their best three, I guess, because Suarez didn't pitch in this series, but three of their best pitchers in Wheeler, Sanchez, and Nola. And Brewer fans get flashbacks to the playoffs where they haven't hit good pitching um, really since 2018. Well, I guess you could make an argument for the 2019 wild card game because they did hit Scherzer a little bit in that game, but otherwise, they really haven't done it since COVID, at least. Um, the thing is, when you're looking at a tiny sample like that, one, these pitchers are good and have good stats for a reason. They get good hitters out too. They don't just get hit around by the good hitters and get all the bad hitters out. That's not how it works. Um, so they do a good job of limiting runs against anybody they face, not just bad teams. Two, the Brewers have been a very good offensive team for really the entire season up until that series. There's been certain games where they had off games. Jack Stern wrote a very good article about how they were bouncing back from any down game, basically, and coming back with, I believe it was anytime they scored 0 runs. There hadn't been, before this Phillies series, there had not been a time where they didn't score 4 runs at least the next day. So anytime they'd had a bad game, they'd bounce back with a really big one for the most part. This series, they didn't hit. There's been a bit of a power outage, I guess you could say, of late. They really haven't been hitting, the Brewers have not been hitting as many home runs as you would be hoping to see and as you were seeing earlier. I mean, there's just a lot of people who haven't been. William Contreras has been in a pretty big funk. I'm very glad he got the day off yesterday. We can talk about that later, but I'm not worried about the offense based on that series at all. I think it's a good offense. I think you have to remember that baseball trying to break down baseball in a span of one series or a week or whatever is just it's not worth it. It's not really indicative of anything during those stretches. And that's a big reason why the playoffs are pretty hard to say that the best team wins every year. No, the team that played the best in the playoffs won that year. But small samples in baseball are tricky. They're confusing. There's a lot of noise. And a bad series against a really good pitching staff and a really good team, I'm not concerned about that moving forward at all. But Gunnar, I don't know if you have different thoughts in that regard.
No, I agree. I think one, we showed that we can compete with these tough teams. Now, granted, we didn't have the offense, but you can really say that they didn't have the offense either. It's not like they blew our socks off. So I feel good about that as far as a competitive standpoint. And I feel like we had more opportunities than what the actual box score ended up showing, at least the final score did. Still didn't hit great, but I mean, that would have made the games a lot closer, maybe a couple times put us in a better position to actually win the game. But I still felt good coming out of that series. I was shocked, of course, to see the fan reaction of overreacting and whatnot to the offense. But like you said, though, earlier with the playoffs, I mean, we haven't seen this Brewers team hit really well in the playoffs, at least very recently in the playoffs. But also, you look at a lot of different teams. I don't know if a lot of teams hit super well in the playoffs. I think there's a lot of timely hitting that happens because you play a lot of good pitchers. So you're not going to have this soaring offense throughout the playoffs. You get lucky and you have some, like I said, timely hits and whatnot. But and I don't want to call that randomness when you get to that time of the year, but there is somewhat of an aspect to that. You obviously want to put yourself in good positions and have good hitters and all that. But I'm not too concerned, I guess, as a whole with this group. I think the one question that I had to ask was. Because the way that we score runs, and you mentioned the power outage maybe of recent, maybe what's this group's identity when it comes to offense? And I think it's almost in a good way that you can't actually pinpoint what that is because it's you win in so many different ways. It's not a one-show pony, I guess is the one way to put it. I mean, it'd be nice if we hit a bunch of home runs and it's just a super flashy offense, and maybe that is what I want secretly because I love watching that. But I don't know if that's actually how you win games long term and consistently. I think if you look at our lack of power, like you mentioned, though, it's the guys like Reese and William, Gary, Yelich. I mean, those are probably your power guys, but even I would say the two out of that group is probably Reese and Sanchez are the guys that's like, okay, those guys are power guys. And Reese is
Yep.
not just that, but those are the guys that are the power guys. Ironically, the two guys that we signed, but William, Yelich. I mean, those are just good hitters. It's not like they're power hitters; they're just good hitters, which is good. Good overall hitters. And then you got the other half of our lineup where you got Ortiz, who's a breath of fresh air for this group. He does a little bit of everything, doesn't strike out. And now that's Bryce Terang too, I guess. He's a little bit in that same boat. And then you got guys like Sal and Perkins, who Sal is probably our one guy where we're hoping to get a little bit more out of him, but Perkins, I think, is actually bringing something at least a little bit different in his own aspect where bunts, base running, he at least if that's your worst hitter in the lineup, I'll take that. But I think the contrast with this lineup is maybe the best way to go about it because we can win in so many different ways. One through nine, really through the order, I'm excited about because it's a lot of different ways that you can win, but I guess maybe in that question, Spencer, do you like the fact that we don't have an identity? Do you wish that we had maybe one more of the other? Like you wish we had a little bit more power in this lineup. You wish we had a few more guys who, I don't know, are more hitters like Ortiz or Trang or just what do you want to see in this lineup? Or do you like what you see that there's a nice mix here?
Yeah, I like the offense. I have not believed this much in an offense in a long time for the Brewers. I think, like you said, it's being multiple. It's being able to do things in a bunch of different ways. You want to score runs. Uh, Yelich had a really good quote after the first game of the White Sox series, or whichever game it was in the White Sox series where they had 23 hits and scored a bunch of runs. But they had 18 singles out of that, and it was all they didn't hit a single home run. They scored all their runs on singles and doubles and maybe a triple or two. And he talked about how basically it's not something you want to do or rely on, but the fact that you can do it and have that type of game is meaningful. It means that you can go out and have a big game even without hitting for power. The thing with hitting home runs is that it can cover up other weaknesses, so you want that power to be there. And right now the Brewers they're tied for 13th right now with 68 homers as a team. They have fewer games than the other people they're tied with, so we'll put them in 13th basically. But they're also like 5 homers away from being in seventh. So a good series, and all of a sudden they could be top five in the league with a good series, and the guys and the teams ahead of them not hitting a ton of homers. So they've been up there. They actually have been falling down this leaderboard because, like I said, there's been a power outage lately. But like Gunnar touched on, you got Reese, you got Gary. Williams been in a funk, but he's going to hit for power. Yelich only has 1 homer since coming off the IL, but I think there's still going to be power coming from him. Willie will always be a power threat. And then even a guy like Jake Bauers was really hot for a while, and now you haven't been getting home runs from him. So I think he's a streaky guy. I think you're probably going to get another stretch of pretty good pop from him. So I like the way it's built. I like the fact that they're up there in stolen bases. I think they're third in MLB in stolen bases. They get on base, they wreak havoc, even if they're not hitting for power. And then they do have all these guys who are built for power around the guys who aren't. And that's, to me, a balanced lineup that they haven't had in a long, long time. Even 2018, like this is a better all around lineup to me than what they had in 2018. They just happened to have some real middle of the order guys, and then Yelich in the second half became an absolute monster and really carried the offense for most of that time. But yeah, I love this offense. I think you're going to see the power start popping back up a little bit more over the next week or so, I would imagine. Getting back home might help. Philly and Detroit are both pretty big parks, so that certainly doesn't help anything when you're trying to talk about hitting homers. They also had 2 homers robbed in the last game of Detroit. So there's a lot of things that factor into it, but I like the offense. I'm excited about the offense, and it's just nice. And I say this as a pitching coach who loves pitching and someone who was definitely defensive oriented as a position player, especially in college. But it's more fun to watch a good offense than it is to watch the teams that are built completely on pitching and defense like we have been for a while now. And I still enjoy that, but I fully understand why fans didn't love watching that. Um, so it's been fun. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they do the whole season because I think there's a lot of depth around these players too. I don't think it's something where if somebody falls off, the offense is going to fall apart. I think they have a lot of ability to fill in for people if they do start to not hit as well or whatever, they get injured, whatever it might be. But yeah, we'll jump into the Tigers series in a second here. First, a couple of moves. We're going to talk about all the pitcher injuries a little later. So on the offensive side, Garrett Mitchell is beginning a rehab assignment tonight, the day we're recording. So you'll be hearing this Tuesday morning. He will, if things go to plan, have played in his first rehab game Monday night. I guess looking at that though, Gunnar, when he returns, there's going to be an interesting decision to be made in the outfield. And I think it probably almost certainly has to come down to Chourio, Frelick, or maybe Blake Perkins. But I guess who would you see as the most likely odd man out from that group? And might it not be completely based on performance, but also certain things with, for me, Chourio's situation isn't totally based on him maybe outperforming Sal, but could be based on needing to keep him up here and get him experience. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny you stopped on Perkins and you're like, wait, how is he in this group? But it's funny because he's actually played himself into a position where he shouldn't really be even considered to be sent down. So I don't even think he should be in that conversation. It's just he is by default because he's the lesser of the name of the three guys. But um, on paper, I would probably say Sal makes the most sense, but Jackson, as far as performance, probably makes the most sense. But as we talked about, I think I still want to see Jackson get opportunities um, and probably dating back to our topic before with the lineup. I like the fact that he's the one wild card and the fact that if he hit like 5 home runs in a week, I would not be shocked in the slightest if
Right.
all of a sudden he figured everything out. And he's like the missing piece, if you want to call it that. We like our lineup right now, but just what he can potentially bring if he figures it out. And I don't know how many at bats he has right now in the pros so far. It's just, I think comparatively to Sal Frelick, where I think funny enough too, I just checked his stats before this, and he's got like the same amount of at bats as he had last season, and there's almost identical stats with Sal. So The other bit of tidbit news that I think we'll talk about later, but I might as well touch on now, is we heard about his shoulder injury that was nagging supposedly through last season and then through spring training maybe a little bit, and now throughout this season. So um, maybe that's a way where once Garrett comes back, they can say, we'll put you on the IL and give Garrett his chance to shine a little bit here and see what he brings, while also giving Sal a little bit of time off. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they figure this out because probably before the year, like I said, Blake Perkins was probably the guy they pointed to, like, okay, if we have this big of a log jam and we really can't figure it out, this is the obvious name we'll send down. But definitely not the case. And I definitely didn't think I would be standing here talking about that I want Blake Perkins still on the roster because um, he's even hitting a little bit better than I thought he would too. Um, and bunts maybe a little bit too much, but it works. So I'm not gonna at all harp on that because if you can bunt for base hits and keep defenses on their toes because you're actually good at it, keep doing it. I love seeing it. So um, just in the defense that he brings is I think we might have talked about it and touched on it before in a recent episode, but absolutely crazy and maybe a little bit more of a different discussion too is if Garrett does come back and Blake stays, who plays center field because Blake is no reason why he should leave center field, and that's been Garrett's spot since he's been up here. So that's another interesting tidbit, I guess, too. So I guess
Yeah.
who do you think out of this group maybe deserves it the most? And if you want to touch on that topic too, of what happens when there's two center fielders looking at each other and they both have to play, who gets to play center field?
Yeah. Well, I guess on the Perkins note, this he's sixth in the NL for outfielders in WAR right now. Like he has a legitimate, he won't make it and he probably shouldn't. But if you were just doing all-star voting right now, Blake Perkins has a case to be made, which is absolutely insane. You would not have expected that at all. He's got a 107 WRC plus, and like Gunnar said, the defense is absolutely the calling card here. So he's been an above average hitter with that defense. I mean, there's no way you even, I don't even see how you take him out of regular appearances in the field right now. Um, I think it's got to be Sal, and part of it is that they're the same handedness for hitting. Like there's the same, they're both lefty hitters, and in terms of what Chourio's mostly been facing lefties lately, now he has started both of the last two games against righty starters, which is encouraging to me. I'd like to see that continue regardless. Um, but yeah, I think it has to be Sal, and I'm a Sal believer. I think he actually is hitting a little bit better, and like Gunnar said, we'll talk a little bit more about what might be hurting him, well, physically and kind of hypothetically at the plate. But yeah, it's obviously Yelich is locked into an outfield spot. There's no debating that. Blake, I think, is locked into a roster spot. I don't know if it's going to be as regular of playing time once a guy like Mitchell's here, but I do think he's probably the one I'd put in center if both of them are in the lineup. I think Mitchell's fine and right. His arm, both of them have good arms. I guess we'll see how Mitchell's arm is now that he's coming off this injury, but um, I would probably lean towards Perkins in center because I think he's legitimately one of the best in baseball, and I don't think Mitchell's that far off from that. But we know what Perkins is. We have a lot more data on Perkins somehow than we do on Mitchell, which I wouldn't have guessed coming into last year. But we've seen it a lot more from Blake, and he's that dude in center. Like it's very impressive. It's Lorenzo Cain-esque defense in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think it's Sal for me, but I do think if they don't believe that Chourio is going to be able to play regularly and he's only going to be a platoon split guy, then I think you need to send him to AAA and get him the opportunity to work on those things and let him hit every day or regularly at least. But if they think they're still going to find regular playing time for Chourio, then I'm definitely going with Sal. But yeah, and then I guess the other roster news we can quickly touch on. The Brewers signed Eliezer, I believe is how you pronounce it, Hernandez, or Elizer. I don't even remember. I know I heard it on the broadcast and I forgot, but they signed him. He was with the Dodgers earlier this year. He's been working on a little bit of a different pitch mix. Jack Stern wrote a good article about what the Brewers might try to do with him on Brewer Fanatic, so you can check it out there, but not going to dive too deep into it. He is at least a candidate to potentially make a start or two. I wouldn't be shocked if we see him do that because he has been stretched out and starting in the minor leagues and one time for the Dodgers this year. So that'll lead us into the Tigers series, which got off to quite a different start offensively from what we saw in the Phillies series. And Well, I guess we'll start. The Brewers won that game 10-0. They were facing a former Brewers farmhand in oh man, why am I blanking on the name here? Um
Reese Olson.
Reese Olson. Yeah, I
Yeah.
wanted to say Daniel Norris so bad because that's who we traded for him.
How do I know that and you don't know that? And you're the one
He
who
was my
actually hates
guy
that
too.
trade.
I was
Yeah, I
so
know.
mad. I was so mad when they made that trade. Well, actually, I'm going to start with that. That trade at the time. So I actually didn't hate, I will say, I did not hate the idea of getting Daniel Norris on the Brewers. I thought there was merit to him potentially playing pretty decently out of the bullpen. But the moment I saw we were trading Reese Olson for Daniel Norris, I was very upset about the trade. And for the most part, I have been very trusting in what Stearns and Arnold do with their trades. Even the Pomeranz trade, as upset as everyone else was, I actually saw what they were hoping to get out of him, and I wasn't a big Dubon believer. He's actually had a better career than I would have anticipated him having. But the Norris trade and then the Trevor Rosenthal trades are the two trades that I was just very, very upset about at the time. Rosenthal, I mean, it didn't work out, obviously. Um, the outfielder they gave up has also not been great for the Rays, so it's not like it's a huge. He ended up with the Rays. He was with the Giants. They traded him to the Rays. So it's not like it's a huge deal, but the Norris one has come back to bite because Olson has been fantastic for the Tigers. But not the other day. The Brewers were able to jump on him immediately. Um, I shouldn't say immediately. Good first inning from Olson. He looked pretty good. I mean, the changeup looked really good. The breaking ball looked good. Um, Brewers were having some pretty rough swings against it in the first inning. And then in the second inning, that changed very quickly. They just came out and started peppering balls, really. They were laying off of the changeups when he put him down, forcing him to come into the zone, and he has the command to do that. So he was throwing a lot of strikes, but Reese Hoskins, now I've got too many Reeses to talk about. Reese Hoskins was able to sit on a changeup and drive it into the left center for a double, and that really seemed to start things because they ended up scoring 5 in the second, 3 in the fourth. I believe Olson was pulled halfway through. No, he got through the fourth inning and then he came out in the fifth inning, and the Brewers were able to add on 2 more. And on the pitching side of things, Tobias Myers, who only got recalled because of Robert Gasser's injury, ends up going 8 shutout innings, only 1 hit allowed. That 1 hit was the first batter of the game, a little jam shot to right, who he actually picked off while the second batter of the game was up. So it was a pretty dominant start. He only had 5 strikeouts to 3 walks, so that's not anything too special, but there wasn't a lot of hard contact. He was missing barrels. He obviously was able to limit hits at an insanely impressive degree. And if that ball doesn't fall in the first inning, you probably see him go out for the ninth if he's going after a no hitter because he was only at 100 pitches. But the Brewers used it as an advantageous time to get James Meeker his first major league appearance. Meeker's a cool story. It didn't go overly great. He had a scoreless inning, but he got out of a little trouble with a double play to end it. But a cool story, a 29-year-old who was signed out of indie ball at 26 years old. At one point between indie ball and pro ball, he had gone 55 innings in a row without giving up a run. And that was only, I think it was like the first 20 innings of his professional career, too. So it wasn't like it was like, oh, he gave up no runs in 50 indie ball and then he did it in the minors for 5. I think he started his pro ball career with about 20 innings scoreless. So he doesn't have anything super exciting stuff wise, but the guy keeps getting results at every level all the way through the system, and it was cool to see him get rewarded. He was sent down immediately following the game, but he got his chance to pitch in the majors, and who knows if he'll be back? Hard to say, but it was a cool story. It was good to see him get an opportunity. Nice of the Brewers to give him a 10-run lead, so there was no pressure on him at all when he came in. And yeah, he got out of it scoreless, so hard to complain. But I guess to touch on a couple of the offensive highlights, I just kind of ran through it quickly. But Bryce Terang with a 4-hit game. Gunnar, I think we got to admit something here, or maybe or maybe not, but I'm ready to. I think Bryce Terang is legitimately a good player now. I'm pretty bought in. I think it's pretty legitimate. Now, do I think he's as good a hitter as his stats say right now? Still, no, I don't. But I think the approach and what he's doing now, everything makes it a lot more sustainable than whatever he was doing last year. And I think there's a very good chance he could be at least an average hitter, and with everything else that he does, that makes him a good player. Yeah, where are you at on Terang? I know we talked about him a lot in the offseason and how we were not
Hmm.
fans, but where are you at now?
Yeah, I gotta admit that he is good. And something we talked about last episode, probably a little bit too, but and really throughout the offseason was him having to know himself maybe a little bit better is don't be somebody that you're not. And the Brewers have done a pretty good job of understanding who the type of hitter is and what they succeed at. Um, and with Bryce, we mentioned, I think last episode too, not to keep saying that, but the bat speed, where that looks horrible on paper, but I think that's actually by design a little bit because all of his hits seem to come the other way, and that's the eye test tells me that, and also the numbers tell me that like it's not even close, and it's very by design, as I said. And I think that's why when you look at the numbers, it seems like okay, a lot of blue, but also he doesn't chase, doesn't whiff, doesn't strike out, walks even a little bit more than I would have thought he would, but. Um, he knows really when to jump on the pitches that he should. This is why you maybe see a little bit more extra bases out of him this season. But also when he does hit, just knows himself, like I said, and the bat speed tying that into the fact that he doesn't really hit the ball hard, but knows himself and knows how to get the pitches that he wants to hit, doesn't try to do too much with it. And then also knows when to jump on the balls, of course. And then his defensive was exactly what we expected that to be as well. So um, maybe a little bit of a sneak peek here as to who might be make the All-Star team for us. He definitely deserves it at this point. Yeah, I did not think I'd be standing here today in June and saying like, wow, we might have gotten a steal here with Bryce Durang out of nowhere, and deserves to play every day and gets all the chances that he should be getting. And I think versus lefties, I'd probably want him at the bottom of the order, which they have been doing, and then versus righties, top of the order. But it's also a great contrast with the guy like Joey Ortiz because
Hmm.
um, almost the same type of hitter, but Joey has a little bit more pop to him and can touch that part of him side a little bit more. But I want to see Joey lead off, and then maybe the same thing is where they flip flop and
Yeah.
depending on who they play. But between those two guys and Bryce specifically, I think I'm just loving what I'm seeing and not unfortunately, I just, you hate to be wrong, Spencer, and I was clearly very wrong on this, but um, more almost credit to the Brewers, I want to say too, and why I wanted to bring that part up because I think they do a really good job of just letting guys be who they are, and maybe that's a little bit of Pat Murphy too, because we talked about like why would he announce him as the second baseman to start the year when there's still 2 weeks to go in the season, and something we said was like because to give him confidence and tell him like, hey, this
Yeah.
is your job, don't worry about it. Be yourself and do everything that you do good. And it's worked out perfectly in his favor because he's done everything that he does really well. And now you can't argue with the numbers. Like I said, maybe on paper you can say, okay, it doesn't look like a great hitter. If you squint a little bit and don't look at his stats, you just see a lot of blue. But um, as far as the eye test go, I think it weirdly does match up, and I think he's a good player. Which, like I said, I wouldn't expect to be saying that now, but yeah.
Yeah. And I do want to say, like, we reference Savant pages a lot. Um, there's not, you can't base everything that you're looking for in a hitter off
Mm-mm.
of that stuff. It gives you a nice place to start from. But when you talk about a guy who has a lot of blue, if you look at someone like Luis Arias, there's going to be a lot of blue, but he's a legitimately good hitter. He just doesn't do certain things well. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean he's not a good hitter overall. It just means he doesn't necessarily hit for power. Or some people are really big power hitters and they don't hit for, I mean, you might see other things that aren't great, like the strikeout rate or the whiff rate and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean they're not good hitters. The guys who have all red are usually good hitters. You can usually ascertain that they are good hitters from that when you look at that type of thing, but it just gives you a nice idea of where they stack up in certain elements against the rest of the league. But yeah, I guess last one we want to touch on, Yelich, 3 for 3 in this one. He had a walk as well. I guess the only thing I want to talk about quickly with Yelich is what I noticed, and then I actually heard on, I believe, Effectively Wild. I was listening to that the other day, but I was actually looking at this on Baseball Savant. Yelich has the highest increase or the biggest increase in his pull rate of anybody in baseball this year. He's pulling the ball way more often than he has in the past, and especially against last year's numbers. Um, to me, you don't always want that from hitters, but for him, I want him to be pulling the ball a lot more, and especially now that the shift is gone because he hits the ball hard, even if it's on the ground, you're a lot more likely to get a hit these days than he would have a few years ago. I like seeing him pull the ball a lot more. I think it's going to help him eventually start to tap back into the power that we saw before the injury as well. Anything you want to add on that, Gunner? It's just similar thoughts where it's a good thing, you think?
Yeah, it's a good thing. Another thing that the numbers probably told us the last few years. I know there was one stat where every fly ball he pulled was a home run at one
Yeah.
point. Um, and it seemed like another obvious stat where it's like just try to pull the ball. Like it's you literally have not failed yet doing it. And that was when in the midst of his even his quote unquote like down years, that was still the case. Um, and you wonder if maybe he was getting a little bit too cute and trying to maybe I think when you're not getting hits, this is more of a baseball mindset type of thing. I think he was just really trying to get hits when things weren't going
Hmm.
well. Instead of it's not really an all or nothing approach, but when you've got the power that he has, I think a decent mix. You always need a nice balance between those two things. And when you're going really badly for you, you're just trying to do things to get you hits and stuff. And um, I think now that maybe he's realized he's got a good balance, I guess is the best way to put it. And it was very obvious that he needs to pull the ball in the air and good things happen. And um, not shockingly that he's doing that and good things are happening now. So super good to see.
Yeah, agreed on everything you said about Yelich. Yeah, we'll move on to game two here. So this one ends up being a 5-4 win for the Brewers. Freddie Peralta made the start for the Brewers against Casey Mize. Freddie had a tough time putting hitters away. Not the first time. It's been happening quite a bit recently where he's just missing by way too much. He's nowhere near the plate on 0-2, 1-2 counts, and that's putting him in these positions where he's having super high pitch counts, and it's just he has not been very good lately. And this one, he was only able to get through, I believe, 3 1/3. Yeah, 3 1/3 innings. Jared Koenig ends up coming in. He goes an inning and 2/3. Koenig continues to just be fantastic. Enoli Paredes came in for Koenig, got 2 outs before giving away to Brian Hudson, who recorded 4 outs, 3 of which were via the strikeout. His ERA back down to 1.03 on the season. He's been absolutely fantastic as well. Yoel Payamps with a clean eighth inning, 2 strikeouts, and Trevor McGill with the 3 up, 3 down save without a strikeout, which was a little weird to see, but still, he pitched very well. Nothing hard hit in that inning. On the offensive side, mostly just kind of scratched together these runs. I want to point out one big moment, two big moments, I guess I would say. One of which the Bryce Terang was on first base. There was also a man on second. Pop up from William Contreras into shallow right field. Colt Keith, the second baseman, and I can't remember who was out in right field for the Tigers, but both of them seem to be calling the ball kind of at the same time. They end up running right into each other. The ball falls directly next to them, and Gio Urshela is waiting for it. Impressively, Terang made it to second with ease. There wasn't even a throw. My guess is that he noticed the pitcher was not covering up first, which is it's a weird situation for a pitcher there because you probably should be backing up third in case there's a throw there. But it also allows Terang to have a ton of space because nobody was occupying first defensively. But he did exactly what he's supposed to do there. He got to second. Then there's a fly ball to left by who would that have been? Sanchez, maybe, who hit that? No, Willie
Yelich, I think.
probably. Or was it
It was
Yelich who hit
Yelich, I
the
think.
sac fly? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yep. Sac fly to left for Yelich. Yep. And the throw kind of sailed in a little bit, not much. And third baseman backed up off of third. Terang, who had gotten off the base just to kind of read the throw, noticed that he was going to have enough space, sprinted in, took third, and ended up scoring on a little chopper to third on the next play. And really, again, the play going to second isn't anything too special because I think he had a ton of space, but it was still good awareness. There's plenty of players who may not have realized that they could get off as much as he did. And then taking third on that sac fly was incredible base running, and it was a really good read, whether it was the contact play or not, to get home on the chopper as well. So in a game that the Brewers won by one, that type of base running is very important. But the other one, and I think honestly, one of the more noteworthy moments for me in a while for the Brewers, Jackson Chourio against Shelby Miller, former Brewers AAA stud. Not really, but he was in AAA for the Brewers for a little while, and now he's actually kind of revitalized his career. He's been decent in the majors for a couple seasons now, but he was facing Jackson Chourio in the sixth inning, down 1 run, a spot that the Brewers have been hitting for Chourio a lot, especially if they have a righty on the mound. And Murph ended up giving him the chance to go up there. This is a high leverage spot, whether it's the sixth inning or the eighth inning or the ninth. Like, this was a high leverage spot in this game. And he gave him a chance to do it, and Chourio rewarded him by hitting a first pitch fastball that was honestly probably off the plate inside, pulling his hands in, hitting it to left center for a double. Blake Perkins, who was on first base, just an incredible job of base running and a very good send by Jason Lane, I should add. Perkins is able to score from first on a ball that honestly didn't even get to the warning track in left center. They cut it off before that. It wasn't even all that close, honestly, to getting to the track. And just, I mean, he got a perfect jump. Obviously, with 2 outs, he was going on contact, but cut the bases really well. Just kind of another thing that Blake doesn't necessarily get noticed is that he does run the bases quite well, and he's very fast. He just looks so nonchalant doing everything that you don't really think he's that fast, but he's a fast dude. So that was a great play by Blake. Again, a lot of good base running in this one from the Brewers, and we can point to that as one of the ways the Brewers can win games even without power. They can do it with their feet. They can do it with, they had a bunch of infield hits in this game. But you can do it in a bunch of different ways. But after the game, Murph, talking about Chourio, just kind of said he likes what he's been seeing from him. He thinks he's being more selective with his swings, which I would agree with. I think he's been better at not just going after whatever he sees. He's going to have some chase issues. It's going to be part of his profile, but he's been a lot better in that regard. And I'm very happy that he gave him the chance. And he basically was saying, like, hey, we got confidence in you here. Like, yeah, we could pinch hit for you right now, but we're going to send you up there and we're going to give you a good opportunity to come through. And credit to Chourio because he did it. And it was, like I said, it was an impressive piece of hitting. He got the hands in, got the barrel to a ball that I believe was off the plate at like 94. So really good to see. Gunnar, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. We've talked about Chourio and how we think he should be handled, and we've talked about the pinch hitting a little bit. You like seeing this? Are you hoping we continue to see this? What are your thoughts on how Murph handled this spot and how Chourio handled the opportunity?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the wild card aspect I'm talking about too, is maybe one thing, and I've mentioned that, is maybe with Chourio is the one thing you've seen a lot of, not even a lot of, but the one thing you see maybe a little bit more consistently, and for a hitter who's hitting as bad as he is he does have a little bit of pop. And that's why you want him in those moments too, I think. It's nerve-wracking because he might be a guy who chases, and as you mentioned, it seems like he's been more selective. So maybe Murph did reward him in some sense, even though I don't think it should come to that. But I'm glad he took opportunity and did what he did with it. We mentioned the base running too with those other two guys. Those are 2 runs that probably shouldn't have happened technically on paper, but in a 1-run game that we ended up winning, we won the game pretty much because of those 2 plays. And then the one thing obviously you mentioned too was the contact play, which I think I've saw a lot about, and you get a lot of jokes of it on Twitter and people talking about it. I don't really know what to think of it sometimes because I think some of it's just randomness and luckiness of that ground ball he scored up the middle. I think with Turang, it's like a play where I think, yeah, if you get a good read on it right away, you're going to score. And then sometimes it gets hit to like third base and it's like very obvious, like, okay, don't try to score on this, and then they get thrown out. So people remember those, I guess, sometimes more than the ones that actually work because terrain makes it look so easily, and then it's just like, oh, he scored, and like he was supposed to score, but he got a perfect jump on a ball that maybe a lot of people don't score on, and then ends up scoring. So like no one really thinks about it another again. But those are 2 plays that with him and Blake Perkins that again 2 runs, win by 1, and that's why you win is because of those 2 runs. So.
Yeah.
And a new way to win for the Brewers, but also a very familiar way to win for the Brewers that maybe doesn't get noticed a lot.
Yeah. And I will say, coming off that Philly series, I understand people having some concerns with the contact play because that did not go well in Philadelphia, but it did work out here for sure. All right, we'll quickly touch on game 3. Not much to talk about with this one. Brewers lose 10-2. I think looking at the schedule and the probables, this was I would have been pretty surprised if the Brewers won. You never know. It's baseball. Things can happen, but I can't say I was feeling super confident in the Bryse Wilson against Tarek Skubal matchup here. Skubal, for my money, is the best starter in baseball this year. I don't know if that holds, but I think so far this year he has been the best starter in baseball. He hit 102 in the start yesterday. Absolutely ridiculous stuff. The changeup was down to 84 at times. Like I said, fastball was sitting upper 90s, changeup getting down to 84, slider in that mid to upper 80s. Even he threw one at 93. Like some of the best stuff you've seen. He commands it really well. Um, yeah, honestly, the only thing I want to quickly talk about is back to Chourio. It ended up being an out, and nobody's going to pay too much attention to it. But I thought Chourio had the best at bat of the season for him so far against Skubal. I don't remember what inning it was, but I know there were two guys on, and he ended up working a full count. He laid off a couple pitches that were close to being strikes, but one you could make the argument clipped the zone, but that was with one strike. It wasn't with two, so it's not like he would have struck out on this call. Um, but he took some pretty close pitches. He took a good changeup, and then he lined a 99-mile-per-hour fastball back out to left field at 99 miles per hour himself. Riley Green made a really nice diving catch on it, probably saved 2 runs. But to see Chourio that comfortable, like it was a really comfortable looking at bat against Skubal in that spot. And later in the game, he ended up singling up the middle against Skubal on a pretty good swing. I really do think we're starting to see some pretty good signs from him. I'm hoping he starts to put things together a little bit more. Again, this is kind of around the time where he started to do that in Double A last year. Very different levels of competition when you're talking Double A and MLB, but there's been a lot of good stuff lately. Gunnar, I don't know, one, if you have anything on that, but two, I do have one question for you, and that is, can the Brewers continue to give Bryse Wilson starts? Is he a starter? Like, to me, he's done an admirable job. His numbers look fine, but I think what we saw yesterday is much more in line with what you're likely to get moving forward from Bryce. Um, for my money, no. I think they need to find a way to get him out of the rotation. But what we're going to talk about right after we get through this series is going to give plenty of reason why it might be hard to do that right now, too. But what are your thoughts on Wilson and Chourio, if you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, with Wilson, I was going to say first is maybe part of this is the fact that the injury bug has struck at the perfect time where he's getting great results, but the numbers don't actually back it up maybe a little bit too much. Um, and maybe going forward, he might just keep getting opportunities because he's just a guy who can eat innings and maybe keep you in games. But in the ideal role for him, I still would like him honestly in the long relief type of role. Um, just a guy who can eat innings and maybe has a little bit more of a higher ceiling than what we're actually seeing right now. I think he gets a little bit exploited when he's a starter. And he's not, when you're a little bit more contained, and this is more my brain, so you can tell me I'm wrong, you're the pitcher. But I feel like when you know you're just getting 2 or 3 innings versus you got to stretch it out for 6 innings, I think you get a little bit more freedom. And I don't even know if he would get 3 innings in the bullpen. Maybe sometimes he would if it was a bad start or something, but that's what he excelled in last year because he does have pretty solid stuff. I'd have to compare it to last season, but I just think when you're more in a box like he was, I think you see better results versus a time when you have to face. I mean, a lot of times you're going to have to face a lineup 2 times through the order. It's just once. That might even be a couple innings. So trying to stretch him out maybe isn't the best idea. And we're getting another guy who comes back, I think, soon with Jacob Eunice. So we'll talk about him later. But a guy who I think they wanted him in the bullpen when he came back. If that was the last update I got, we'll see what you say. But that would be the long relief type role. So then maybe Bryce is stuck as the starter. I would like to see those guys probably flipped on paper. But yeah, I just think he's getting exploited maybe a little bit too much to my liking. But again, who's next in line is really the biggest question, and it's not really anybody now because we just lost another arm again. So you could probably do worse, and we've seen worse, and we'll take just good results, even if it means doesn't look the prettiest. Even early on, I think this season too, when he first started starting, he looked honestly legit good when he first started starting. Like it looked solid to me, and then third time through the lineup, you could start seeing him get a little bit more shaky, like he was just battling to get through those last 2 innings. Then now it just seems like we're just battling the whole entire time, and it's tough to even get through the start. So maybe he's just running out of gas too. He's not used to starting. It's not something that we've even seen really in the past of a guy going from bullpen to all of a sudden you're a starter now and you're starting every 5 days. It's actually pretty rare to even see that in general. So I don't know how to handle that. Honestly, it's going to be who's available and who's better off. But yeah, and I think the touch on Jackson too, just quickly, it's um, that's what we want to see out of him. And I'm glad you mentioned the lineouts and stuff too. He had a good day of hitting. It just didn't look like it in the end. So um, I just think he's just so close to breaking out, and I just need to see it. And that's why he just needs to keep playing because it can happen whenever it can happen. And you talking about the starting pitcher that we faced, Tarek or whatever his name is. So really, really good starter. And on paper, lefty, righty. I mean, Jackson favorable to him, I guess, in some senses. Obviously, it's he's super good, so it's probably not favorable. But a situation where if he's the wild card guy, I think something nice could potentially happen with Jackson
Mhm.
there, and he could run into one. So you're probably just trying to scrape across 2, 3 runs again with this topic of a guy playing when you're playing good starting pitcher. That's all you want. It's just a couple good moments, and that can win you a game. Unless you got Bryce Wilson on the mound, I guess too. So, how would you handle Bryce? And maybe we can tie it into I know our solar topic later on with Jacob Eunice. I feel like those two guys are pretty similar in my mind. You can tell me I'm wrong, but I feel like those are like similar type of roles that they would have. And I don't know,
Yeah.
the long relief, you're a starter, maybe you're a long relief type of pitcher, but how do you see us handling Bryce and how should we handle Bryce?
For me, Wilson, I the tough thing with him is that both lefties crush him, lefties absolutely destroy him. He's got terrible splits, and he's terrible the third time through, which means there's not a ton that you like. They load up their lineup with lefties. He's going to get hit pretty decently to begin with. They start putting him, you want him to make a real start. He's going to start getting hit pretty badly the third time through. And like you said, I think a lot of the solid numbers, like the first time through, came out of the bullpen and from his first few starts. Um, he struggled to get out of clean first innings a lot lately, it seems like. Even when he has, there's been quite a bit of luck involved. I don't really believe in him as a starter. But like you said, I do think a guy like Junis is probably one of the guys who would have taken this role. And I think he's a better pitcher than Wilson, but I'm not fully sure he's going to be able to make starts based on what we're hearing. And that just makes it hard. It makes it difficult. I think we should honestly, before we even this all ties into what we're about to talk about. The reason why he's most likely going to end up staying in there for now. Um, we'll jump into all these injuries. We'll start with Junis since we already started talking about him. But there was a lot of not great news coming out today on the starting pitcher rehab front. We got Junis. He's going to be pitching a sim game in Arizona on Wednesday. He was in Nashville. The hope is that he would be ready anytime after this upcoming sim game, but the Brewers are going to need to see some improvement in a few areas they've been asking him to work on, namely his velo being down a decent amount in AAA. So they're putting him in a more controlled environment to try and get him ready. But I also worry, like, okay, but he's not going to be going into a controlled environment when he comes back to MLB. He's going to be back in a game setting. So I don't know how ready he really is. I guess we'll find out. I mean, I trust the Brewers to do this correctly. They obviously know more than I do, both in this specific situation and in general on these types of things. I really don't know the ins and outs of it, but to me, there is some cause for concern here. So I don't think we're going to be seeing him starting, and I'm not even 100% sure we're going to see him all that soon. And in a similar vein, Joe Ross had a setback his last time he stepped on the mound. And based on what Jack Stern tweeted out today, it sounds like we won't be seeing him anytime soon. So we're still a ways away from getting Ross back. Robert Gasser, we obviously got some pretty rough news on him. Um, he's going to get a third opinion on his sore elbow, as the first and the second had differing opinions. But Pat Murphy says he's operating as if Gasser will join Brandon Woodruff and Wade Miley as players that are out for the remainder of the season. Um, Murphy says, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. That's not very confidence inducing. Hope is not something you want to rely on here, but maybe you get a little lucky and the third doctor thinks he's fine. But either way, it sounds like there's a pretty good chance he's going to need like a PRP injection or potentially Tommy John surgery. And given those two options, both would most likely put him out for the year, if not maybe a little bit earlier with rehab and the PRP injection. But in my opinion, if he gets anything that shows not great news, he should probably get the surgery and get that over with and move on. to the next part of pitching. Not a great spot to be in there. And then I guess maybe our only real positive pitching news, in a way at least, is DL Hall. His news that he got from the doctors was more in line with saying, you can play through this. It's more of a pain tolerance thing, but you might need some sort of like cleanup surgery on the knee afterwards. So he is going to continue to rehab it. He is returning to Nashville. He left today to resume his rehab assignment in Nashville. So we'll keep updating on how that goes. Hopefully the velo is still up like it was last time we saw him in Nashville. Hopefully the fastball characteristics are still where we want it to be. And maybe they will continue to try and build him back up now as a starter because as we just went through, there is a extreme lack of starter depth right now. But on that note, there have been a few rumors going around, and I wouldn't say they're super tying the Brewers to these players, but they have been connected by both, I believe, Ken Rosenthal and for sure Robert Murray, Garrett Crochet, and Jesus Luzardo. So I'll start on this, Gunner, but for me, if I'm getting one of them, I would prefer Crochet. I think he has the much higher ceiling. I believe they both have 2.5 years of control left, so it's not really a matter of money, though Crochet is a lot cheaper than Luzardo, so there's a pretty good chance he'll be cheaper all the way through arbitration. Neither of them are going to make a ton of money even in that last year. But for me, Crochet has that huge, huge ceiling, like top of the rotation, best pitcher, better than Freddie type of ceiling. Whereas for me, Luzardo has the really solid mid rotation type of ceiling, but not quite the same amount of swing and miss, not quite the same type of stuff as a guy like Crochet. I think in terms of value, they're not that far apart because Crochet doesn't have the history of health that Luzardo has. Luzardo's been more available, um, which there's a lot of value to. And from the Brewers' perspective, that might be more valuable than a guy like Crochet because they do need pitchers who can make starts. Crochet's already passed his innings, his max innings from any other season in his professional career. We saw him in that White Sox series, and he was holding the stuff over 100 pitches. He hit 99. I think he hit 100 on like his 106th pitch of the start. So this is a really big bodied dude. Like he's tall, he's built really well. I think he probably holds up fine, but I could see the Brewers, if they had to pick one or the other for the same package, for the same exact everything, preferring Luzardo just because they think they're going to get more innings out of him under these circumstances. But I guess I'll throw that to you first, Gunnar. Is there one that you would prefer over the other? I don't think, I know you have both on here. I don't think they'd be able to afford both of them, honestly, over this. This is going to be an expensive, if they get either of them, it's going to cost quite a bit to do so. But which one would you prefer? Let's say in a vacuum, no package included at all, just between the two of them.
Yeah, I think Crochet for sure is probably the one that I'm most in on and most excited about. But the problem with that one is probably the price tag. Um, because he's got such a high ceiling and he is young and he's got this electric stuff. It feels like it's just too steep, and that's something that we haven't seen the Brewers go out and get. And that's something I told you right away when these news or these rumors dropped, and I'm like, when is the last time we try to get an ace in the trade market? Maybe trying to think, was it literally Zach Greinke was maybe the last time we tried to get an ace? And I know these guys don't have the repertoire as that, but um, guys who are like really, really good like this, it's very rare for us to get that. But then, as you told me, it's because maybe with Crochet, it's because we don't actually have that ace in our system potentially, which we usually, I think we do a pretty good job of maybe getting the ace in our system because they're cheaper, and then we work around that. And that's maybe a way that we can save money. But nowadays, it's like if Freddie's the guy, he's not really holding it down at the top of the rotation, and now
Right.
it's kind of hurting the rest of the rotation here. So it makes sense that we're going after a couple of these names or bigger names. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, with Crochet though, too, to finish that part up, it's um, injury history was the one that I think as I'm really scared about is why I really can't fully go in here because we'll talk about the package in a second, but you start going over the names and I partially blame you because I only should know about 4 or 5 names that I care about in the Brewers system, but now I can go about 20 deep where I'm like, I don't know about this guy, and it's literally our 20th ranked prospect. But um, you can't prospect hug that much when you got these good of players, of course. But when you start factoring in the injury history and you brought up the innings, I mean, he was dominant in the pen a couple years ago. I know he got called up. Was he one of the guys who got called up like right out of college too?
Yep. I
Yeah,
don't
like
even
the
think
same
he
season.
pitched in the minors. I think he just came straight to the
Yeah.
bigs.
So maybe a weird type of, I mean, he's had injuries too, but he's maybe workload wise, he's not going to be able to live up to a starter long term. So are you really getting 2 years worth of starts out of him? I don't know. Although, like I said, it'd be exciting. But with Luzardo, I feel like he almost fits the Brewers type a little bit better as far as the pitcher type, because on paper, at least, I think the package is probably still not going to be worth it for me. But when I looked at his page, there's a lot of high whiffs, but not a ton of strikeouts. Maybe something's missing there, and that's maybe something that the Brewers can be like, "Ooh, we got something there," because he can tap into something. Um, Honestly, a sneaky fastball too. I didn't know he threw that hard. I knew he's a really good pitcher, but I'm like, he can get it up there to triple digits almost, damn near.
Hmm.
So I like him too. Again, it's just it's so iffy what the price takes, and maybe it's because, like I said, I'm not used to the Brewers going after these types of names. If it's a hitter, it always like seems more worth it because those guys play every day and um, they feel like they value, like you get more value out of those guys. But this season with the Brewers starting rotation, maybe it's just that is where the best value is going to come. And I don't think it's a secret that we're trying to get a starting pitcher at this trade deadline, and we'll talk about trade deadlines the next month and a half. But is that yeah, a month and a half. So
Hmm.
um, yeah, I guess I was shocked to see that we are running these two names, but also not shocked at the same time. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it is always worth noting that the Brewers are pretty much in on any talks, and then
true.
as things get hammered out a little bit more, they may bow out once they learn what the real price is and what they're going to have to pay. But I guess along those lines, in terms of what we'd be willing to give up, there's it's a hard line to draw, and I like again for me personally, I would give up more for Crochet than a guy like Luzardo, but I do like Luzardo. Um, it's hard because when you look at these types of trades, you don't want to be the guy who's just completely overvaluing your prospects in return and giving the other team a completely unfair return. So I don't know that I would even love this trade if it were to happen. Um, but one of the things I was looking at, I think it has to include Tyler Black most likely if you're getting one of these two. And I know Gunnar will hate that, and we'll let him speak in a second. Um, I think a guy like Bradley Blaylock would make a lot of sense as part of a package. Somebody who's already on the 40 man. I like Blaylock, but I'm not completely sold on him as a starter. And the White Sox are dumb, and they may be. So that's always a possibility. I think you're probably looking at like a 4 player, maybe 5 player type of package in this deal. I like Luis Lara a lot. I could see him being a big piece in this type of trade. He has not hit super well this year. I still believe in him long term, but there's probably some doubt in the Brewers' mind because he hasn't started to hit for any more power than he really was before. And that's always been the concern. And now the hit tool's down a little bit, but he's a crazy athlete, great defender. The White Sox may be interested in a guy like that. Someone like Luke Adams would always be of interest to a team, I think, because he hits the ball super hard. He can play first and third. He's a good athlete. He's only 19. All those types of guys are people I would look at in a trade like this, but I think the headliner would probably be a guy like Tyler Black. And you, I guess the only other way I could see if they're super into one of the 3 outfield guys from last year's rookie class that came up, like a Mitchell, a Weimer, a Frelick. All 3 of those guys could maybe headline. Not all 3 of them, but one of those guys could maybe be a headliner if the White Sox have a higher idea or value him higher than what the Brewers or the rest of the league does. Obviously, we saw with a guy like Chourio Ruiz getting us William Contreras. There can be teams with very different evals on certain players. So those are 3 guys who are still very much interesting to a lot of teams, I would imagine. So maybe they could headline it, but I do think Black's probably the one that would. And I will say I'm going to give my pitch on why I wouldn't be that upset if the Brewers were to give up on him. Though first, I will begin with I believe in that bat a lot. I do think he's going to hit at the major league level. I don't know that he has any defensive spot. And I think the one that he does have is probably the outfield. And we know what the outfield is looking like over the next few years now. There's plenty of doubt about a lot of the bats of these guys, but Chourio's locked in. Whether he hits or not, he's going to be there because they're paying him. Yelich, I think, is still going to be an outfielder for a few more years. I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon. They're always going to want to use that DH spot to either add another power bat to the fold, like they did with Hoskins and Sanchez and those types this year, or just getting Contreras or Yelich a day off their feet, but still keeping them in the lineup. And then that other spot, they've got all these guys who are already major league players, including Blake Perkins, who, if he's a legitimately over 100 WRC plus hitter, if he can hold that, he should probably be playing over most of the guys that are already listed. And you could make the argument against Black in that case too, even if he's hitting, because the defense is so good. So if they believe that Black can't play first, which I don't really think he can, the more I see it, it's bad. And third, or any infield spot, and that he's pretty much a DH slash outfielder, I wouldn't be upset. But again, I think that for me is more on the Crochet side than the Luzardo thing. I do think Crochet can legitimately carry a rotation as long as he's healthy, where I don't see that with really anyone else who would be on the market. And quickly, just to throw it out, I think the more likely guy that the Brewers would get from the White Sox is Eric Fedde. I think that one actually makes a lot of sense for both teams. It would not cost nearly as much, but I'm going to throw it to Gunnar now. I know you're not going to love the idea of giving up Black. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, realistically, you got to give up probably one of the top five guys for a guy like Crochet, and then you start going through the names. Mizorowski absolutely would not do that. Jefferson, Carroll. I think I wouldn't, but also I could see a world where you have William locked up for multiple years, catching wise. I know you're shaking your head. I don't want to either, but I'm just saying I'm trying to make a case here. But um, there's at least you got a guy locked down at a catcher, and you can make an argument for it, even though I would want to keep him, and you can easily make it work between those two guys. So wouldn't do that. Tyler Black, it does make the most sense, but we'll skip over him for now because I'll dive into him in a second. But Robert Gasser, we know what's wrong with him right now. He's might not pitch for a year and a half potentially. Who knows what happens with him? So I think the other only guy that makes some sense that has some weight to it would be Brock Wilken. But then you start thinking about him, and it's like we don't have the righty power bat really in our system like that. Really just righties in general as far as a good hitter like him. So and to compare it to Tyler Black, at least he can play a little bit of defense. You have a little bit of hope there that maybe he can stick or stay at third base. Worst case, he hasn't tried out, I guess, the first base as much. At least maybe he has. I don't know, but
Yeah.
that experiment maybe is still there too. But the fact that he's righty, kind of makes me want to keep him. So then that's the top five right there, and it's like, okay, well, I guess Tyler Black does make the most sense. I think the other name that I wanted to throw, I'm not as good as packages as you are, but I figured you'd throw Tyler Black out there, so I wanted to hurt your soul with this one with Eric Brown Jr. I think even if he's not in this package, he's probably a guy that you would look to trade maybe anyways because he has a higher ceiling. He's already 23. I don't even necessarily like hate him at all. I just think he's honestly probably a low value right now because he's not playing super great. But
That's what I was going to say. I don't know
yeah,
that he has, if somebody still believes in him, which I will say I'm still somewhat in that camp, I'm definitely lower on him than I have been. And it's taken a lot to get me to this point. So it's been a rough year, but I do think if somebody came and said, all right, I mean, they genuinely value him as a decent trade chip, then I would
hmm
say, yes, you should probably do that. But if he's more of like the lottery ticket type throw in, I wouldn't do that because I do think he's made some changes recently that might help him
yeah,
at the plate. And I'm still a huge believer in the defense and the base running. And we kind of saw with a guy like Terang, if you can just figure out the bat at all with those two to fall back on, those two skills to fall back on, there's still a lot of value there. But I do agree with you that I think if people value him, then he should absolutely be included in a lot of trade talks because there's still a lot of risk there and a lot more risk than I expected there to be.
yeah, he seemed like the sore thumb just on age, and then yeah, the risk too. It's um, maybe a little bit more blocked scenario too. I guess with Willie Adames and now Joey Ortiz playing short, and Bryce Durang now playing well. It's like
Hmm.
okay, you can start making the argument again of like where does this guy fit in? But
Yeah.
I think you'd see him more on like you mentioned, like Eric Fedde. I think those type of trades. Um, I could see somebody making a case for being like, okay, this is a guy that actually could play somewhat soon, maybe.
Hmm.
And then also have a chance to break out, which I guess that would hurt too. And that'd be a classic Brewers trade is you're like, oh, we gave up on this guy, with Trent Grisham, and then all of a sudden there you go. Um, but yeah, I guess to further tie or start diving into Tyler Black because I knew I was prepared for this segment. Um, I do agree he's limited very defensively. Um, but hitting wise, when you look at left-handed hitters in our system right now and who we got up right now in that group of like Garrett, Sal, Weimer, Chourio, it just feels like somebody in that mix of like the freshman and part two of the freshman has to hit like quite literally hit, but stick a little bit more than what we've seen so far. Ironically, somehow Bryce Terang is the one that hit, but I just need somebody else to be able to actually stick and be a part of this group for the future. And I think Tyler Black offensively fits the best out of all those guys. Now, how he would fit this year and next year is that's where it gets tricky, of course, is because he doesn't have a defensive position. So, um, on paper, I guess I would just try to find a way to use him as a hitter this year. Um, that's more towards the end of the season when you don't have to worry about developing him, I guess, or something, or the amount of at bats that he gets. But um, trying to be, I mean, maybe Jake Bauers never figures it out, and now there's a spot there where he can DH a little bit more or something. I don't know. It's not going to look pretty this year. I know that because of all the spots that are filling up pretty fast here, but I just think that bats is too good to not at least tap into what we could see this year out of him. And I like that he walks, and I just think he does a lot of things differently than what the other left-handed hitters do on this team right now, as far as the young guys in that group. Um, but yeah, next year I think you mentioned Yelich doesn't move. The one spot that would be left field, which that would be a whole offseason of trying to figure him out in the outfield too. We think that's probably his best spot and his best position, just because even if it's not, it's by default his best spot because
Yeah.
nothing else works for him anyways. So he's got to try it out, and I'd be shocked if they didn't. So unless they're committed to him as a DH going forward, I guess that could be a possibility. But the Brewers don't really do that either. So
Yeah.
and that's maybe not even good value to have a guy like that. So that would be why you trade him. So, yeah, it's just I get it why it's tough, and I get also on paper why you would maybe give up on him out of that group to get a ace. And maybe that's their thinking too, and that's why we're seeing bigger names because we identified this one guy who's a top prospect, but also has no spot in our in our lineup for the next couple of years, and it's a perfect opportunity to get a really good pitcher, but not hinder us really in any other way as far as the young guys go. So I get it. It'll just sting a lot if it's not for a guy like Crochet or Lizardo. I'll probably be okay with it after thinking about it for a while, but um, I would totally be fine with it for Crochet, I guess, thinking about it more. But yeah, it's just tough. You hate giving up on guys like that, especially when you didn't really get to see him a ton in the with the Brewers. But I get it too, and I guess thinking about it more, Reese Hoskins might not be here either next year. So I mean,
Hmm.
his first base spot's open, and he's just not doing good at it. So
Right.
he kind of made his own bed here, which sucks. But yeah, I guess I don't know what else to say. It's heartbreaking for me, but I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not super convinced they're going to make a deal for somebody like this. I would be
Mhm.
more surprised if they did than if they don't. Um, like I said, I think we're looking more at the Eric Fetties of the world than these two. But I will say I wouldn't like it in this scenario, but I wouldn't even rule out a Tyler Black inclusion in like a Eric Fetty trade. I don't think that's off the table. He is a year and a half of control. Um, I would, like I said, I don't think I would like that one, but that one wouldn't completely shock me either. That would be more of like a one for one type deal, I would guess, more than like a trade package, but not something I'd be thrilled with, just something I could kind of see happening. But yeah, we'll move on from the trade talks. Like Gunnar said, we're gonna have plenty to talk about with, I'm sure, rumors. Brewers are going to be connected to a bunch of names. They always are. We'll talk about all of that on future episodes, but I think we got to talk a little bit about Carlos Rodriguez's call up. You mentioned it earlier. Sounds like it's still not technically official, but it's borderline official while we're recording here that he will be making his major league debut on Tuesday. Um, I guess I'll just throw this out first. I did write an article about what Brewer fans can expect from Carlos Rodriguez. kind of now, but also in the future. That's on Brewer Fanatic. You can check that out. It's on my Twitter. I tweeted it out, but you can also find it pretty easily on the website. But really, I think what people need to understand is that this is not a guy with like blazing stuff. Like you're not going to be blown away by any of the pitches he throws. I think the slider and the changeup probably have the most above average movement profiles. Like they might jump out to you like with the naked eye when you're watching. For the most part, what he does is throw the kitchen sink at you in a good way though. He throws three fastballs. He's got a four seam, a sinker, and a cutter. All of them have played pretty well of late. To me, I wonder if the Brewers are going to have him go more sinker heavy like they did with Gasser when he got to the majors. He does have a bit of a problem with home runs at times. The sinker has had a huge ground ball rate, and he has not allowed a homer on it this year in AAA. I think it's something that might go to more often. Same with the cutter, and then lowering the four seam usage a little bit. If he uses the four seam less often, it actually will probably play better, and he'll probably get more swing and miss with it. But like I said, he's also got the slider and the changeup. To me, those are the best two secondaries. And then he throws a curveball as well. It actually gives a little bit of like a Zach Greinke vibe to it, where he will drop into the 60s with the curveball at times to drop it in for strikes. It's so slow that hitters don't really know what to do, and they just end up sitting and watching it a lot of the time, which is what Greinke was always aiming for when he threw that. And then he can throw it in like the mid 70s, which is where it normally sits, and get some swing and miss with it. But like I said, it's going to be a mix of all these pitches. He's going to be trying to change eye levels. He had some walk issues early on. He really straightened those out over his last six starts. He's been fantastic over his last six starts. And it's super important to note, too, that he was the third youngest pitcher at AAA, at least qualified pitcher at AAA during his time there. So this is a guy who's moved really quickly through the system. He was a JUCO selection. Not surprisingly, the Brewers have done fantastic with junior college pitchers. This is another one that's showing. I mean, he's in the majors. Would I have brought him up? Would I have hoped he'd be up right now? I don't think so. I think he could handle it and he might be fine. But we just talked about all the injuries and all the circumstances that the Brewers are dealing with for pitchers right now, and I think they kind of had to bring him up right now. And there's a decent chance he's going to do okay because, like I said, somebody who mixes all his pitches, there's a lot of like Colin Ray type similarities to his game, but then you have the idea that he's young. He's got a lot of room for growth still. So if you can get a Colin Ray type pitcher with more potential, you take that any day of the week. I just think every time a Brewer starting pitcher comes up, people probably start to think, "Oh, this could be like the next ace." He's not. He's not that. He's most likely topping out at a mid rotation type of guy. I think that's probably best case scenario and more likely to be like a solid 4 or 5, a guy who's got like a 4 ERA, has a decent amount of strikeouts, probably gives up some homers. Nothing blows you away stuff wise, but he just keeps you in games and gives you chances to win every time. And that's super valuable. It's just not nearly as exciting as some people are always. Obviously, the Jacob Mizorowskis of the world are more fun to dream on, and you get to watch all those guys in the minors, and he'll be very fun to watch when he makes it to the majors. We saw it on when he got his one chance in the futures game, touching 102. The Statcast data was absolutely insane on it. That's not who Rodriguez is, but it's really not who Gasser is either. And he obviously has, before this injury, gotten a lot of love from Brewer fans. So I think they do appreciate this type of pitcher as well. It's just hard to dream on this and be super excited when you see some of those pitches. But I guess quickly to touch on, I do think there's a chance he's going to be here for a while. He has to be added to the 40 man in order to come up. So if you're doing that, you're probably planning on him being here and staying here. If it goes well, I expect him to kind of slot into the rotation and just keep pitching. I don't think it's a case where he's going to go right back down like they did with Ashby. I think it's more in line with what we saw from Tobias Myers, where he's going to keep getting chances until he proves he shouldn't, and then he might go back down. But even at that point, we talked about it with Wilson and all the injury. Like they're still going to be missing starters in the rotation at that point, and they might just need him to keep pitching. So I think there's a pretty good chance he sticks, and there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be some probably not great starts, but hopefully we see on Tuesday a really nice start to his career. I will be in attendance. I believe Gunnar is going to be there as
Yep.
well. Um, I went to Robert Gasser's debut and it went fantastic. So I'm hoping we get a repeat of that for the team and the player. But yeah, Gunnar, do you have, I know pitching's not super your thing, but anything you see or you want to talk about with Rodriguez or anything along those lines?
No, I just think we need him, and I think combining with that is I hate seeing anybody rushed if that's the case. I don't know if he's necessarily rushed. I think he was always going to be on the fringe if he was going to make it up this year anyways, so I don't feel too bad in that sense. I think maybe Robert Gasser too is hopefully, I mean, he was exciting when he was pitching, so I don't want to like again rip on fans for being like, hey, don't celebrate a guy doing well, but I think he's maybe um, not done a great job of halting expectations. So people are going to think this guy is going to be the next ace coming up, and then maybe he won't be. He's just going to be
Right.
average, which right now that's super valuable, and that's all we need is just an average pitcher.
It's always
Um,
super valuable, honestly.
yeah, so I will take that. I don't expect the Robert Gasser type of starts with, sub 3 ERA or anything, but I'll take whatever he gives us. We need it right now. And I think part of it too is I'm almost more scared as the more injuries happen and whatnot, is maybe you want to touch on this for like a second, but I feel like our luck has to run out at some point too. Like we're almost playing so well with all these injuries, it seems like, and a lot of it just to our starters, but. It's like, can we still keep winning and everyone else is just letting us have this like 5+ game lead in the division the whole time? And it seems like something's going to catch up to us at some point, and not necessarily tied with Rodriguez, but that's probably why we need reinforcements too. We just talked about the trade. I mean, something has to happen so we can stop that from happening and avoid a horrible situation like a 2014 or something, or we can name the collapses that we've had. But it's not even really like that too. This team's so young and exciting that it's not going to even feel like that when if it does happen. But um, do you think maybe we has this season been deserved so far? I mean, or do you expect it to keep going the way that it's going and we can still do with whatever happens? We're just going to keep winning, I guess, even if we have more injuries and we're just plugging and playing guys as starters.
Yeah, I think the entire point of how the Brewers tend to build their roster is to be prepared for stuff like this. They value depth as much as anybody in baseball. It's something they very specifically try to build up in the minors. AAA team is often filled with a lot of vets or longtime minor leaguers that they believe could stand in decently if they have to come up to the majors. So this is something they're doing well. I mean, they have been doing well for a long time. I do think eventually the bullpen has to pay the price on what they're picking up the slack for this starting rotation. Like they have been asked to do a ton, and eventually that bill kind of becomes due, and some of these guys are going to get worn out. They might start getting hit a little bit harder, but that's also why, again, the Brewers have a lot of pitchers who can fill in for a guy who ends up not performing well at the end of the year. They're missing guys like Bukauskas, who I think is a good reliever. They're missing a lot of guys who are just like long relief types right now. Even if Ross and Junis can't come back as starters, if they can eat 3 innings, 4 innings every time they go out, you can still kind of continue to hold off exactly what's been all of these starter injuries. And once you get to the playoffs, you're really only having to worry about 3 starters being healthy, and then the rest can be eaten by the pen, and you have enough off days to just run a 3-man rotation. So I think they'll be fine, but I do think that you're getting close to that point where you have to go make an addition to be able to hold up over the course of an entire season. But yeah, I think we have talked a lot in this one, so we're gonna wrap this one up with a kind of a more fun question, I think, than the rest of what we've been doing here, and just talk about the All-Star game and kind of who you think deserves a chance to play in the All-Star game. Not necessarily a starter. I don't know if the Brewers even have a starter at the moment. Maybe Contreras. I'd probably say Contreras should start at catcher. Um, but other than that, I mean, what are you looking at in terms of? I think I could name six. Yeah, I could name six Brewers that I would have on the roster. But who? Let's see. I'm guessing you're similar. So who do you have? And I'll say if it's the exact same.
I'll say my locks first. I got three different layers, I guess, here. Lock was William Contreras. Obvious, he's been top 10 player probably in baseball. hitting wise at the very least. We know defensively there's been some struggles, but he for sure deserves it. Joey Ortiz, one, deserves it, but also I think you look at the landscape of third baseman too. He's almost a sore thumb at this point. I think he just should honestly deserve it. Like it's not even close, and he's deserved it by playing that as well. But just the group that he's going to be against, I think he earns it. Bryce Terang, we sneak peeked that one earlier, but um, yeah, I think he almost could have an argument to start. I had to look at his. I haven't looked at second base a lot. I wonder who he's going against, but
I think
um,
Ketel Marte's probably got the inside track at that one right now.
yeah, so maybe not, but for sure should make the team. And then Brian Hudson to me is a lock too. Um, I think he's had a couple rough outings, unfortunately, recently. And when I say that, it's like in the last month that he uses electric the whole time. But if he could just eliminate those, he would have like there should be zero argument. But I think there even is right now zero argument for that. Then the next one, who's like in my sandwich list in between these two things, is Yelich, where 100% deserves it based on stats. It's just that he probably needs to have a solid month here because he missed some time. He should make it anyways, but just based on like looking at a stat sheet, it feels like it's just not thick enough for me. Like he needed to play more, and he can definitely have that happen in the next month or the next 3 weeks, and just have like a solid 3 weeks of baseball, and he should make it. And then the last one is a guy who should probably make it, Willie Adames. But not super amazing, crazy stats, but another situation where I think who he's going against, he probably still earns it. And it still earns to make the team, not a starter or anything. But all six guys for sure have a case in one way or another based upon their who they're going against, the season that they've had, and they've all had solid season at the very least. But um, I'm most excited, probably obviously, about Joey Ortiz making it because that's just the dream scenario to have that happen. He still feels like he's so underrated right now, and maybe not amongst Brewer fans, but it'll be cool to see him in an All-Star game, and people will be like, "Oh, that's the guy they got for Corbin Burns." And then we also have a pitcher who hasn't really pitched much right now, but and then we'll have another guy here, and then next month almost with the MLB draft that we'll
Hmm.
be picking up. So. It'll be nonetheless more savage for us to have Joey Ortiz in the All-Star game just to rub it in the Orioles fans' faces or whatever. But yeah, who do you got? And I assume they're the same-ish six names, but
It's the
um,
same. Yep.
yeah.
Same
So
six. I do agree on Yelich, though. I will say the NL outfield is horrific this year in terms of people who are competing for that spot. So
mhm.
even without the number, like the volume of numbers, I think he's pretty easily in right now. Um, yeah, I mean Hudson really only had the one bad game. He gave up the two homers to the Cubs, and that was it.
Yeah,
And
I guess. Yeah.
ERA is, like I said, I think one more scoreless appearance here, and he'd be back under one for the season. So pretty hard to argue against him. Willie's been second or third best shortstop in the NL behind Ellie De La Cruz, and then Lindor's having another pretty solid season this year. So yeah, he should probably make it. Ortiz absolutely should make it. I just worry that he's not going to get any fan love.
hmm
And then how many third basemen do they actually take? Who knows? But he should make it as long as he doesn't have a bad month here. Williams, an easy one. He should probably be starting at catcher. Though he last 20 games or so, he's got like a 500 plus, somewhere in the 500s for OPS. Like it's been a rough stretch here. So hopefully, like I said, that day off yesterday gets him back on track. And yeah, did I miss one that I was gonna talk about here? Oh, Terang.
Bryce. Yeah.
Terang should be in. Like I said, I think Catel's the only guy who has a case to start over him at second base right now. Um, he's having a very good season. He's got a 135 WRC plus and playing really good defense at second. Frankly, he should start over Terang, and then Terang should probably be the second baseman to make it. So, yeah, six. I doubt the Brewers get six in the end, even if all of them are deserving. Just kind of how it works out. There is a league rule that every team has to have at least one, which means the team that has a bunch of them usually is the one that gets somebody cut off that shouldn't have. And in the past, the Brewers have had a lot of pitchers, and with pitchers, a lot of them end up opting out and then getting into the other players get into it because of that. They won't really have that this year because it's probably just Brian Hudson. If we're being honest, that's probably the only one that has a real shot, barring like an insane June for Freddie here. Because he'll at least have the strikeout numbers. So I guess if he has a great June here, maybe he gets in based off of that. But yeah, I don't know that you'll see many replacements end up making it, but you never know. I think right now those six absolutely would deserve to be in it if it happened tomorrow. We'll see where they're at in a month, but it's a good place to be in for sure. You don't hate seeing that from a bunch of your five of your position players are all very much deserving of all-star appearances. Three-quarters of your infield, and the other quarter of your infield is Rhys Hoskins. Like, not going to complain about that. That's a pretty good place to be in. So, yeah, why don't we finish this one off, Gunner, with our random Brewers?
It shows Doug Davis. I have a bobblehead of Doug Davis. I was trying to look up honest the last probably not 5 minutes when you were talking, 2 minutes probably, but I was trying to figure out what do you call his facial hair. When you got just all you have is just below the lip and a straight line down. Um, I don't, it's just ingrained in my brain. That's pretty much all I remember of him, lefty pitcher. I was trying to
The
look up
soul
his
patch,
stats
is that what
too.
it's called?
That's what I thought, but I didn't want to be wrong in that.
We both think it. It must be right.
Yeah, it's got to be right then. But I couldn't get any confirmation. Um, it looks like he had a couple of solid years, honestly, with us, but played in
He
the
was fine.
Diamondbacks too. Yeah, so solid pitcher. Another one of those guys you think he's the man when you're a kid, and he's like, oh, this guy's like Randy Johnson out there, but he's really not. He's just Doug Davis. That's all. That's all he is. He's just Doug Davis to me. But that's all he needs to be is Doug Davis to me. So, who do you got?
It's funny you say that. I believe Randy Johnson's only career home run was off Doug Davis against the Brewers, if I remember correctly.
Really?
And then the only home run that Randy Johnson ever gave up to a pitcher was who, Gunner?
I don't
It's
remember.
connected to my name. Giovanni. Giovanni went deep off of
Oh
Randy
yeah,
Johnson.
yeah. Well,
And the
I should have
Brewers,
just guessed that anyways because it's Giovanni.
that would have been a good guess. Yes, it's just no matter what. Um, but that connects to my player because I didn't even mean to do this, but the Brewers traded Giovanni Gallardo for Luis Sardinas. They
There it
also
is.
got Corey Knebel, and who was the third? There was a third player in that trade. Marcos Diplon. That's who we got. That was the third one.
Mm,
But Sardinas played in the majors with the Brewers. Obviously, Knebel did too, but Sardinas did it in a much funnier way than Knebel. Knebel was actually good. Sardinas came up at 22 years old. He had already been in the majors the year before at 21 with the Rangers, and yeah, he didn't do much. He had a 457 OPS. He played a few different middle infield spots. He could play kind of all over. The Brewers ended up trading him, and I'm going off the top of the head on this too, but I think it was for Ramon Flores they got from the Mariners. Um, he ended up playing for the Mariners for 1 year, did not go well there either. He went to San Diego in 2016, only 120 plate appearances, but a 770 OPS that year in that time. Um, then he followed that up with a 390 OPS in very few plate appearances. 2018, he was an Oriole for a couple weeks, and he has been kind of bouncing around he left like full pro ball in 2019, and he's been bouncing around. He's in the Mexican League right now. He has an OPS of 867 in the Mexican League, independent ball. I think it might be the same league. It looks like that, like Trevor Bauer and Luke Voigt and those guys are in right now. So I don't know if that's good for the level or not. It's probably not. It's probably a pretty hitter friendly league, but yeah, he's still kicking. He's only 31 years old. Like this dude was very young when he was a Brewer, but he was I only bring him up because I was very excited about him in that trade. Knebel had like fun stuff, and I knew he could probably be a good reliever, but Sardinas felt like the prize of it because he was the real prospect that played a position. You thought maybe he'd be able to hit. He was pretty fast, like an exciting athletic guy, and it just did not work out. But that's funny that I was able to accidentally connect those because that was not where I was going at all. And then I was like, oh, segue. Yeah, that's all I got. You got any Luis Sardinas thoughts before we wrap up here, Gunner?
No, I just know I was excited about him too. He was a top-ish prospect, wasn't he?
Yeah,
So, yeah, I was actually honestly excited about him as well, but
yeah.
um,
Gallardo
didn't
did not
happen.
work out in Texas. Texas probably doesn't trade with us anymore because a lot of our players went there and did not perform very well. Jeffress being one. Lucroy was fine for them that half season, but well, Gomez I guess went there after Houston and did not do well there either. But yeah, it was I was very excited about Sardinius when we got him. He did not work out whatsoever. Anyway, again, I've turned this into ripping on a player that I was trying to like highlight in a nice way, and then now I'm being mean to him again. But that's it. That's the episode. I
Another
gotta
day.
wrap this up right now. I'm rambling
Yeah.
about stupid stuff. Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod, and remember to please feel free to leave feedback for us on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
Go Crew.